I'm going to do just a very brief intro because some folks were here yesterday, some were not. We may have some new attendees on the webinar. So on behalf of the Roger Williams University School of Law and the Marine Affairs Institute, welcome to our program. This is the 9th Marine Law Symposium. We do these events to provide a clearinghouse for the professional community to gather and engage and for students to be exposed to the latest cutting-edge issues in marine affairs. Our topic today is particularly timely given the events of the last couple of weeks with Hurricane Sandy and an election in which all of a sudden climate change became part of election coverage, which I found very gratifying. Let me tell you just a little bit about what this program is and isn't. It is not a comprehensive look at all things climate change. We are focusing on the oceans and the coasts. Part of that's because we're the Marine Affairs Institute, and that's what we do. But there is some logic behind that as well. Most of us live along the coast. We have a lot of infrastructure on the coast. We have a lot of economic values derived from activities along our coasts. And this really puts the effects of climate change on our coasts in sharp relief, I think. So we're focusing on that. We are taking a survey approach to this topic. We could spend a day on almost any one of the panels or speakers that we have. We could spend a day on the Arctic. We only gave them an hour and a half yesterday. We could hear a lot more than 15 minutes from each panelist, but we're limiting to that. So you really get a broad view of the various ways that climate changes in the oceans are implicating our lives. So that's what we're doing today. Yesterday we took an interesting tour. We went from the Arctic, we went to the Northeast, we discussed impacts of property changes along the shorelines and heard some really fascinating scientific information about what we know is going on out with the oceans. So today we're going to be covering a few very interesting topics. We're going to talk about what people think about climate change, which is directly relevant. We talked a little bit yesterday about mindset and heard speakers talk about how do we get people to think about this and pay attention to it and the impacts on their lives. We're going to hear some in-depth information about that today. We're also going to talk about the impacts on natural resources. I realized when I was putting this program together, a member of my planning committee said, aren't we going to talk about the animals? Everything we're talking about is effects on people. What about all the other stuff out there that we have a management responsibility to? So, good point. So we have a non-human focused panel today. And we will also have a panel that's going to look at maritime industry implications, direct linkage to some of the conversations yesterday about infrastructure and how vulnerable it is. We're going to wrap up with a case study panel of non-New England states. We heard from a lot of very innovative managers and work being done in the New England states yesterday. We're going to hear today from folks from San Francisco, from Louisiana, from Texas, and from Maryland to really give us a sense of I think Dr. Pettis referred to a sense of hope about the issues that we're facing. And a lot of the work that's being done right on the ground, I think, is very instructive for us to all walk away with. I'm going to ask you all in our multitasking electronic world to please consider the people around you and the great speakers that we have, and try not to multitask too much in the room on your electronic devices, and please mute them so we can continue without too many interruptions. I want to just do a brief thank you to our terrific staff at Marine Affairs, our terrific staff at Instructional Design that are supporting webinar capability and recording capability, our media folks, student volunteers. It takes a village to put on a symposium, and we have a great village here, including my advisory board and my planning committee, so I have to thank all those people. And terrific sponsors, Hansen and Curran, National Marine Sanctuary Foundation, Conservation Law Foundation, and the Coastal States Organization. Let's see, any other housekeeping I need to do? There's a bright green evaluation form in your folder. You can't miss it. Please fill it out. Your feedback is very important. Webinar attendees, we've sent you an evaluation form as well. So let us know what you think of this program so we can plan future ones. Other housekeeping. The presentations will all be on the Symposium website. And after we have a chance to do all the editing, after you all leave and we all recover, the panels themselves and the talks will all be posted as well. That won't be right away, but the presentations will all be up in fairly short order. Am I missing anything, Julia? All right, enough of the details. Let's get into the fun stuff. We had a lot of ground to cover today. So our first speaker, I'm just delighted to have Geoff Feinberg here from the Yale Project on Climate Change Communications. He's the research director of this organization, and he specializes in doing survey research about how people across social, educational, and political segments think about climate change and sustainability, and how to use this knowledge to help design messaging platforms that effectively encourage environmentally sustainable studies and behaviors. As with all of our speakers, there's much more to Mr. Feinberg on his full bio, and I encourage you to take a look at that. But I want to let him do the talking about his work instead of me talking about him. He's going to present findings from their report called Climate Change in the American Mind, which is going to give you an overview of the key opinions held by the American public on a variety of issues related to perceptions of climate change, experiences with extreme weather, behaviors, and policy preferences. Geoff Feinberg.
Hi, well, I'm Geoff Feinberg, and I am the research director of the Yale project on climate change communication, which is a project that's housed within the Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies. And I'll talk a little bit about the work that we do. I wanted to say that we're really delighted and honored to be able to present our research to you today, so thank you very much for inviting us. I'm not going to talk a lot about changing ocean conditions. I'm going to talk today about changing public perception about climate change in general. And the findings that I'm going to show you today are hot off the press. However, one caveat, the survey was done before Hurricane Sandy came along. So I have a feeling that that may have had some effect on the findings, so just bear that in mind as I go through this. Let me tell you a little bit about what the Yale Project on Climate Change Communication does. First of all, we do a lot of original survey research, qualitative research, in-depth interviews. We try to measure knowledge about climate change and environmental issues, risk perceptions, decision-making, and behavior, personal behavior. And we're also, in doing this, not only do we do polls that we release to the public and to the press so that they know what the mindset of the American public is regarding climate change issues, but we're also striving to design and test new strategies to engage the public in climate change science and solutions. There are very, very different kinds of people in this country, as you know, and they all have very different attitudes on climate change, and what we're trying to do is figure out who they are and how we can communicate with them effectively. Some things that you say to one group of people just hit their sweet spot, but enrage other groups of people. So we're trying to figure out how do we tailor our messages through various different kinds of media to communicate effectively with different kinds of people. And then, of course, we want to use this knowledge that we gain to empower educators, communicators, people in NGOs, all of the various environmental groups that are trying to communicate this, this information to their audiences. And we have a lot on our plate. We're not a very big group, but we actually work with people in various different universities. We have a lot of very bright doctoral students and postdocs who help us a lot with our work, but we do, what I'm going to talk about today is our Climate Change in the American Mind study, which is kind of our main tracking study. We've been doing it now for 4 years. We've conducted national studies in India, China, the UK, Spain, Israel, and Malta. We've done big international studies across the world in partnership with Gallup. We've also done local studies. And we have a variety of different outreach programs. We have a Yale Forum on Climate Change in the Media, where we converge people from the media to explain to them how they need to communicate about climate change. We have roundtables for journalists. And one really promising program we have is we're talking to weathercasters and trying to get them to weave into their reports on the local news information about how some of the things that they're seeing may, in fact, some of the local events that they're seeing may be exacerbated by climate change. So we think that that has a lot of promise. Here's pictures of our various publications. You can download them on our website. Just Google Yale Project on Climate Change Communication. And again, like I said, it's a team effort. We do an awful lot of work with some really great folks down at George Mason University. And over the years, we've done work with folks at Harvard, Stanford, American University, the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, Columbia. It's a group effort. We've got a lot of specialists in different areas who can help us in our efforts. Okay, so let me get to the cool stuff. So what I'm going to do is just show you some kind of key nuggets that we have found about public opinion on climate change. And what I should say is that these are national polls done with gold standard methods. I won't bore you with the methodology, but we generally talk about every 6 months to 1,000 Americans. It's a nationally representative sample. Okay, so what we've seen here is that about 70% of Americans believe that global warming is happening. And concurrently, with the rise that we've seen since early 2010 in belief, we've seen a decline in disbelief. Now, you're probably looking right here and seeing that back in 2008, 7 in 10 Americans thought it was happening, and then it took a huge dip down to 57% in 2010. And by the way, these findings are corroborated by a number of other organizations that are doing these kinds of studies, such as Pew, Stanford University, et cetera. We don't know exactly why this happened, but we do know that it coincided with the fact that the Great Recession and the longevity and the seriousness of it was really sinking in among the American public and became much less of a priority for them at that point. But encouragingly, what we've seen is a slow creep back up over the years to now where a good solid majority of Americans do believe that climate change is happening. So we're right back up to where we were back in 2008, and we hope that who knows, post Sandy we might be up here. I don't know, but I expect that that's gonna grow. Okay. Now, the big question is, do people believe that it's human caused? And Americans have not been really sure. Because it's a very difficult concept to grasp. There's been a heck of a lot of disinformation out there about it. But now we see, encouragingly, that a slight majority of Americans do believe that climate change is human caused. So that's another trend we feel is going in the right direction. There has been a ton of misinformation about the fact that there is very wide agreement among climate scientists that global warming is happening. Folks have been able to muddy the waters on that particular issue, and so we still do see a fair amount of confusion among the American public. In fact, fewer than half say that climate change is mostly human-caused. However, what is encouraging to us is that more people now believe that it's human-caused, mostly human-caused, than believe it's mostly by virtue of natural changes in the environment. And it wasn't so just 6 months ago. And in fact, you can see as you go back, this trend has really kind of flipped. So that's another encouraging sign, we think. The other thing is that, people think that, we've seen in many studies that a lot of people think that climate change is Maybe it's real, but it's not going to affect us now. And we're encouraged by the fact that since early 2010, the number of people who believe that global warming is harming people now has risen for those in around the world, as well as who believe that it's harming people in the United States right now. Still not a majority, but the trend is going in the right direction. Okay, let me talk a little bit about support for policies. Okay, a large majority of Americans support a U.S. effort to reduce global warming, even if it has economic costs. And the way that we calculate that is we take these three statistics and sum them. Now, some people believe we should only have a small-scale effort, even if it has small economic costs. Some people believe that we should have a large-scale effort, but the plurality believe that we should have a medium-scale effort, even if it has moderate economic costs. What's encouraging is that only about 1 in 10 believe that there should be no effort whatever. As an aside, I will say that the number of people who believe that we should take a moderate effort has been growing, while unfortunately this number has been declining a little bit, and we think that has to do with the economic woes that the country faces. So, who should address global warming? Well, we're seeing again that rising numbers of people believe, and a majority of people believe that the Congress should be doing much more to address global warming. And we're also seeing that corporations, a rising number of people say that corporations and industry should be doing more or much more. And just to take a look at the current findings, not looking at the trend, we asked people who should be doing more to address global warming. And what you see here is a majority, these folks in the blue bars, believe that corporations and industry should be doing more. And in fact, people believe that corporations and industry should be doing more so than they believe that citizens themselves should, more so than they believe the Congress should, and more so than believe the president should. So people are looking to industry to start making changes. Okay, so what I have here is a chart that I'm guessing virtually none of you can read the small print. But what I will say is, let me just run down quickly for you what policies are supported by the majority of Americans. One is funding more research into renewable energy sources. About 3 in 4 Americans support that now. The majority support providing tax rebates for people who purchase energy-efficient vehicles or solar panels. A majority believe that we should regulate CO2 as a pollutant. A majority believe, surprisingly, that we should eliminate all subsidies for the fossil fuel industry. The majority also believe that we should expand offshore drilling for oil and natural gas off the U.S. coast. So let me point, though, to some of those policies that are not popular, that most people don't support. One is increasing gas taxes by 25 cents per gallon and return the revenue by reducing the federal income tax, and far fewer than half support eliminating all federal subsidies for the renewable energy industry, which you can contrast with the number of people who say we should eliminate federal subsidies for the fossil fuel industry. Okay. One thing we do is we take a look at Republicans versus Democrats. We took a real close look at that before the election. In fact, we published a report on the differences, and we were able to show actually that undecided voters looked a lot more like Democrats than they looked like Republicans when it came to support for policies, belief in global warming, et cetera. And I could stand up here and spend a couple hours talking about the huge differences between Republicans and Democrats. Democrats tend to, I think you all know what the differences are. But and again, this was pre-Sandy, and I don't know, anecdotally, I think that there's some possibility for change on that. But what I wanted to do is show you a slide that is cause for optimism, and that is that there is bipartisan agreement that the U.S. should use more renewable energy in the future, okay? Now, granted, there are differences between the red bars, cleverly, are the Republicans. The white bars are the independents, and the blue bars are the Democrats. But what you can see is that what we have here is we go from more down to less. And you can see the trend here is Democrats are much more likely to say more than less, but so too are Republicans. So we think that we can find common ground, and that's a big part of what our effort is to find common ground with people of all political persuasions. In fact, we're working with some people who have served in Congress who are very conservative and yet who do understand that climate change is happening and are making an effort to sit down and talk to people with whom they can relate and try to get the message across to them using the language that's appropriate for those kinds of audiences. Okay. So further expounding on this topic of different kinds of people and mindset, I want to talk a bit about the 6 Americas. And what this is this is a segmentation that we've done on the data. We have a battery of questions that we use where we take people's behaviors, we take their beliefs about climate change, we take a look at their engagement with other people and how much they talk to them about certain things. And we have developed a multivariate statistical model to segment people into clusters based on their beliefs of climate change. And we found this to be extremely informative to us. And I'll go ahead and explain it to you. And what we've done is we've identified 6 groups of people, and it's very robust. We've seen over a number of waves that these segments really cohere, and they're fairly stable. And we have plotted them here all the way from the alarmed down to the dismissives. These are the extremes. These guys, we're never gonna talk. We're never gonna be able to convince them. These people think, that we need to immediately put in many different kinds of policies. And let me go into more detail about them. And I'll say that this is very much like a marketing research segmentation, where you're looking for, what marketers call prime prospects. They're the people who you think that, what you do is you identify the people in the audience who you think you can convince to purchase your product. You look at people who will never purchase your product. You look at people who probably won't purchase your product, so that you can size those groups of people and effectively put your resources into the people you think that you can actually convince will come to your side. And that's kind of what we've done here. So let me talk a little bit about the alarmed. They comprise about 1 in 10 of the American public. They are the most engaged on the issue. They think it's happening. They know it's human caused, and they believe it's a serious and urgent threat. They have already made changes in their own lives and want to do more. These tend to be women who are middle-aged, they're college-educated, and are moderate to liberal politically. Now, just below them, we've got the concerned. Now they too are, and they comprise about 1 in 4 Americans. They're also persuaded that global warming is real, it's serious, and requires policy intervention, but they're less personally involved and less likely to reduce their carbon footprint. These folks demographically closely resemble the American norm, ethnically and income-wise, although they have relatively stronger egalitarian values. Part of the segmentation is a battery of values and a greater likelihood of being moderate politically. But these are people that we believe that we can, that would certainly be worth identifying and talking to. Then there's the cautious. These are 3 in 10 Americans. Now they believe that global warming is a problem, but they're not as firm in their beliefs. They don't believe it's a personal, imminent threat. And they don't seem to feel a lot of urgency to act. About half of them are Democrats, half of them are Republicans. They're not that engaged in civic things, and they tend to be fairly religious. Then we've got the disengaged. And this group's a little different than the others. They're less focused on the issue and are less likely to say they could change their minds about it. They're actually less focused about most issues. They're just not really... we suspect they're not people who vote. They're just not civically engaged. Demographically, they're similar to the cautious, but they do tend to be less educated. They report lower incomes and are more likely to be minority women. Okay, now we get into the doubtful. And this is 15% of the population. And some of them believe that global warming is happening, some of them don't, and there are a lot of them who just, when we ask them, they say they don't know if it's happening or not. They're most likely to attribute climate change to natural causes if it is in fact happening, believe it will harm people only in the distant future, if at all, and that no further policy action is needed. They tend to be Republican, but they're pretty well educated, and they have very strong individualistic attitudes. So these guys are going to be a challenge. I don't know if they would be the best folks to focus on. And then, of course, we have the dismissives. These are the people who think that climate change, talk about climate change is a hoax, that it's the Freemasons, the Trilateral Commission, whoever, who are behind this, and they are very actively engaged. These are the folks who write the really angry letters in response to blog posts or articles about climate change. They believe it's not happening, it's not a threat, and they strongly oppose policy response. They're men, they're very... Why is that so funny? Okay. They're very conservative. They're very religious. They're very strongly individualistic, and they're anti-government. These are not folks we're going to be targeting in the near future. Okay, but the whole point of this is to understand that there are these different groups of people. We're trying to figure out how we reach them, because it's not like they all live in certain areas where we can identify them. They're spread throughout the country. Every community has these kinds of folks. So the challenge in targeting them is difficult, but that's something that we're working very carefully on. And the other thing that we're doing is we're trying to figure out how do we communicate to these different groups of people. Some people you want to talk about, we need policy changes to address global warming. Some people say, with the more conservative group, you say, look, we need policy changes so we can become energy independent. Or there's a huge religious community that is, very worried about climate change, and to them, it's almost as if we need like a Martin Luther King type character who can talk to them and say, this is a moral imperative. We've got to be good stewards of the earth that God gave us, etc. So part of what we're trying to do is figure out what is the language that we need to use to effectively engage these folks. Okay? And that was I know that was kind of a shotgun blast of data. I hope it wasn't too much. And am I done? Was that 45 minutes?
No, it kept resetting, but you're good.
Okay, so how much time do I have?
Just shy of 30 minutes, so we've got 15.
Okay, so okay.
I don't think anybody's got any questions.
All right, so if you have any questions, please ask.
Thank you.
Sure. You in the blue tie.
Hang on, we got to do the mics so
Oh,
we can get
okay.
it for the webinar folks.
Okay.
Stand by.
Dennis Nixon, University of Rhode Island. I was just wondering about that 2010 anomaly. Was that about the time of the Climategate, East Anglia University?
I think it was, yeah.
And that certainly was a 60 Minutes lead story, got a lot of attention, and I think caused a lot of the, I mean, I've heard that quoted to me so many times in discussions of this. I think that had to have had an impact if that was in 2010.
There was a lot of, well, let's see. That survey was taken in January of 2010, so it might have preceded Climategate. No? Was in 09? Okay, so yes. Okay. There was that, but there was also, it was kind of a perfect storm of events that was happening that kind of took climate change off the radar station. There was a lot of effort by various organizations, talk show radio hosts to talk about what a fraud this whole thing was. All of that was happening in late 2009 that probably caused that.
Okay, thank you.
We're going to go to this side in the interest of being
Okay,
fair.
he had his hand up second. Go ahead, go for it. Okay. And I'll get back to you guys.
Don Hooper, National Wildlife Federation, Vermont. I looked at your survey results from about 3 years ago, and they were, I thought, fascinating. And one of the assertions you made was that among that first group or two, that although the support group wasn't huge, it was very deep, and they were really willing to take action beyond buying their light bulbs and Priuses and so on. And I just wondered if in light of the recent election and the triumph of Nate Silver over Dick Morris in the polling, whether there are any lessons from that. And a couple of years ago, moderate Republican, or some would say moderate Republican, U.S. Senator from South Carolina, Lindsey Graham, wrote an op-ed in the New York Times, basically 2 years ago. And he told the Republican Party emphatically, demography is destiny, and climate change is something that's really big for kids, and unless we do something to really get the youth, unless we change our policies about climate, we're going to lose the youth, and certainly the Latino vote was crucial in this election as another thing that he was saying we got to do immigration. So I wondered if you'd comment on the youth aspect, and is Senator Inhofe a dismissive?
I think Inhofe is on the record for saying it's not happening, right? Am I correct? I think he is. He's not someone that we're trying to work with us on this. We'd like to, but maybe in a couple of years. Yes, you look at the data, it's very clear that I actually haven't evaluated Hispanics, so I don't know, I could go back and look at that. But if you look overall at youth compared to older folks, youth is very much more likely to believe that it's happening and that's human caused. And so now that the Republicans are taking a look at why they lost and why they lost the youth vote, they're going to discover that the youth cares an awful lot about this subject, and that it probably would be politically advantageous to begin moving in the right direction on this. We'll see. I mean, one thing that we've seen time and time again over the years is that when you ask Americans about things that concern them and things that they want the government to address, climate change just about every time is right at the bottom. And for those of you who watched Obama's press conference yesterday, unfortunately, he made it clear that it's not probable, at least in the near term, that climate change is going to be at the top of his agenda. And the reason he's saying that is because it's probably not a political winner yet. Over time, of course, as the impact of climate change becomes more obvious, then I think politicians will start to address it on both sides of the aisle. I really do believe that, and we just have to hope that that happens fairly soon.
Geoff, I've got a webinar attendee question for you.
Okay.
This is from Marion Lindberg with the Nature Conservancy, and it's very apropos with our topic and our focus on the oceans. Have you looked at coastal residents versus inland residents in terms of attitude and beliefs towards greenhouse gas and global warming?
No. However, we have something cooking that will allow us to do that in the next six months or so.
Actually, I have a lot of questions, but I'll confine it to one. Of the policy initiatives, and you were showing support for certain types of policy initiatives, was that over the group that believed climate change is occurring or over the total number of respondents?
Total number of respondents. Okay.
Hey, wait.
Thank you. Okay. Caroline Karp, Brown University. I have a somewhat annoying question, so I'll preface my question that way with this note.
There are no bad questions, but there are annoying questions.
That's exactly right. It's a good, annoying question. And that is, your studies all focus on belief, and I'm curious how you address the difference between belief and knowledge. So we've had a number of talks here that talk about scientific knowledge and how we develop knowledge about the atmosphere and consequences of global warming. And I have this sort of ongoing concern about these public opinion surveys that say, do you believe this? Which to me sounds like we're kind of feeding the public this notion that there is something here that's, you know, got to do with belief rather than knowledge.
Right.
And I think the press does the same thing. So I'd like to have you talk about that a minute.
Okay, well, what I can say is in the recent surveys, we haven't really probed particularly deeply into knowledge. It's mostly about beliefs. We have looked at that in the past, and what we do see is that specific knowledge about what's going on is not particularly high. Maybe we should probe that again. And that's one of that's why this is such a difficult challenge in understanding how to communicate to the American people about this, because it's a very complicated subject. I mean, just getting people to realize that climate and weather are different in itself is a challenge. And so one of our tasks, one of the things that we're trying to address is how do we effectively, smartly, and simply convey the facts of the situation in a way that different kinds of Americans can grasp it and believe it. What's that? We haven't done that recently. We've done it in the past. And as I say, we don't see high levels of knowledge about the specifics. Okay. Next, you were next, yes.
Well, I had a real similar question. I guess when I see the longitudinal data and I see the fluctuation in it, gives me pause that it's not knowledge. So I was just curious, when I think of something like evolution, I don't think you're going to see that kind of fluctuation over a time period in people's belief or understanding. And I was kind of wondering, A, why that is, and you've kind of answered that, and B, if you think it's because the policy and the science have been conflated to such a large extent in the media, perhaps, and maybe even in your survey.
I don't know the answer to your question. I'm sorry. A definite possibility. Something worth exploring. Go ahead, and then I promise, you're next, I promise.
Allison Racer from University of Hawaii. I wanted to ask you about Yale Cultural Cognition Project and the piece that Dan Kahan published recently in Nature.
Yep.
And he said that in a culturally divided democracy, it's very unlikely that the best available scientific information is going to be applied to address problems like climate change. And I'm just wondering, and I'm getting the sense that their explanation for why Sandy was not a teachable moment on climate change is that we would rather get along with the people that help us in disasters and emergencies, and rather than identify with a more communitarian group that thinks about the future and future generations. And I'm just wondering if your findings somehow are consonant with the findings of the Cultural Cognition Project.
Well, I think that though we haven't specifically tested it recently, certainly confirmation bias is what's driving the extremes of these 6 Americas that we're seeing. Resolution of cognitive dissonance, is I think a big part of the thinking among the dismissives. And yes, it is a problem. And so one task that we want to do, one thing that we'd love to do, and I think would help people who are cognitively inclined to dismiss climate change and evolution and et cetera, but at least in terms of climate change, is to change the debate between Republicans and Democrats that whether or not climate change is actually happening, but rather keep a debate between Republicans and Democrats, but as to how to best fix the problem. Have the Republicans argue, look, we can't leave this serious problem to the liberals, because they're going to just come in with their big, ineffective government interventions, and we need free market entrepreneurship driving change, and that's what's going to really help the problem. If we could get Republicans to start arguing that, then the dismissives can say, okay, well, I can go along with I'm going along with the Republicans, whatever they say. No, and it's that way on the other side too. It really is, and it's a huge topic of inquiry in social psychology. So that's kind of one of the strategies that we're trying to work on. Did that answer your question? Okay.
We have time for one more, Geoff.
Okay.
Any webinar questions? Who do you want for your last one?
I want her, because I've been...
Great. Thank you.
I'm sorry.
I was struck by one of your comments at the end that maybe you talked to one group about energy independence. And that, as someone who thinks that energy independence is kind of a problematic policy frame when we're talking about the link between energy and climate, I was wondering if you might address a little bit how you characterize and identify kind of policy options that you're offering, and if you've detected anything about this whole energy independence as a policy goal and the way people respond to that.
All right. Well, we don't get into specific policies that would necessarily, or at least I don't have the data here with me that talk specifically about policies that would solve global warming versus achieving energy independence. We have asked that, and what we have seen is that global warming works very well, when you use that word, or climate change works very well with Democrats, but energy independence works very well with Republicans for the same policies. So, talking to conservatives that, we need to become energy independent so that we don't have to send our boys over to the Middle East to spill their blood for oil, or so that we don't have to go into further debt among the Chinese, et cetera, et cetera. That's a very appealing message. And You know, energy independence, of course, could mean a lot more coal production, but that last slide that I showed, or one of the last slides I showed, is that Republicans and Democrats are on board with the idea that we need to use more renewable energy sources in the future. So that, I think, is promising. So if we can merge energy independence idea with renewable energy sources, then we're on the right track.
We're going to take our coffee break. Geoff, you're with us through the break at least, yes? And so he will, I'll throw you to the wolves and make you available. We're going to reconvene at 10:15. Please join me in thanking Geoff Feinberg.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.